Herbstritt from the Department of Ag and Bioengineering at Penn State. Today I'm standing along Spring Creek, a high-quality cold water fishery in Pennsylvania, and behind me is riparian buffer. Buffers historically bordered land throughout the Northeast before they were cleared largely for development and agriculture. The riparian zone is often thought of as the border between a stream and its adjacent land uses, often a transitional point in the landscape or a floodplain. Multifunctional buffers are often thought as agriculturally productive, meaning they provide income that can be used to pay back the cost of establishing the buffer. Income that comes from harvesting perennial grasses, like this field of switchgrass and other pollinators, or fruits and nuts or florals. But multifunctional can also mean flood protection, bee populations, wildlife habitat, and cultural heritage.
Today, we're beginning our discussion on how we can accelerate the establishment of riparian buffers in the Chesapeake Bay to meet environmental goals with minimum government subsidies. To do that, we need to first understand the state of the science on buffers, what's working or not on the ground, and what policies and markets can support multifunctional buffer crops. We're going to hear from various stakeholders on their knowledge and use that to start creating a successful roadmap to guiding future buffer plantings. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Sally Claggett. I'm with the U.S. Forest Service here at the Chesapeake Bay program in lovely Annapolis, Maryland. And we work here within larger partnerships to get more trees in the ground. Trees are the most beneficial for water quality and also ecosystem functioning, since they're the natural land cover for the Chesapeake region. So one of the most important places to get trees is along the streamside corridor, so in our riparian areas. And the partnership actually has a goal for this practice, riparian forest buffers, and that is to get 900 miles of buffer each year. So new forest buffer each year. This has been proven to be a fairly ambitious goal, since it has only been achieved 1 year in the last 24 years that we've had a goal for riparian forest buffers. So, but they continue to play an important role, as I said, in water quality, and the way that manifests is in the state watershed implementation plans, or WIPs. The states are actively working on their Phase 3 WIP, Watershed Implementation Plan, right now, and they're due into the partnership in 2019, the first half of 2019. We expect buffers to continue to play an important role there, much more than the kind of the rate of restoration, the rate it has been going. In 2017, for instance, we got 56 miles of new buffer, which was a lot of work put into that, but of course nowhere near where we need to be for either the water quality goals or for even the ecosystem restoration goals. So we really need to greatly accelerate the rate that we are doing riparian forest buffers, and we're actively, as a partnership, actively looking for new programs, new incentives, and we're very eager to hear your ideas on this, so we can accelerate the rate of which we're restoring riparian forest buffers. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tracey Coulter. I coordinate the Agroforestry program for DCNR Bureau of Forestry. DCNR offers programs that provide funding to plant conventional riparian forest buffers, as well as buffers specifically designed to combine ecological function with income production. Income-producing buffers funded by DCNR are typically divided into 3 zones. Zone 1 is the closest to the stream and is planted as a conventional buffer to shade and to provide forage for aquatic communities. Suitable plants for this zone include black willow, sycamore, swamp white oak, and silver maple. Zone 2 extends from Zone 1 and may be planted with fruit and nut trees intended for harvesting for profit or for personal use. Species to consider in this zone include pawpaw, persimmon, serviceberry, and elderberry. Zone 3 extends from 35 feet from the stream bank and is considered the most commercial part of the buffer. This zone may include short rotation woody plants, grasses, or perennial wildflowers planted and harvested using mechanical equipment. Appropriate woody species include red osier dogwood and winterberry holly. Buffers planted through these DCNR programs are still young, and it will be several years until they come into full production. But research shows that buffer-grown products can be profitable. In the meantime, while the buffers are growing, DCNR is partnering with marketing specialists and others to find ways to help connect producers with the markets for their buffer-grown products.
My name is Brandon Tennis. I'm the Director of Stewardship for the Lancaster County Conservancy. We're out here at the Foulmouth Forest Garden within the Conoy Wetlands Nature Preserve. This forest garden project is reverting 5.5 acres of fallow farm field back into what really should be here, which is productive floodplain forest. We're trying to restore what is a vital yet threatened ecosystem. So we're emphasizing native, perennial, edible species, both to increase the carrying capacity of the land for wildlife, but also for humans. But then also what we get out of this is the mitigation of floodwater as well as stormwater runoff. It also would include combating climate change through carbon sequestration, the reintroduction of species of concerns, but at the same time being a destination and a demonstration site for all of the people that are on this trail traveling back and forth.
Well, we've been working out here for a good chunk of the spring and summer here in 2018. We did a lot of planning.
A good reason of why we're focusing on edible species within this floodplain forest is because of this alluvial soil. That's a mixture of silt and loam, extremely productive soil. It's no coincidence with a soil like that we would have black walnuts beginning to reemerge on their own, even amongst aggressive, native, and invasive species that are indicative of fallow agricultural land. The elderberries that are over there and what was the existing walnuts over there, those species are what we designed everything else around. When people come here, I hope that they see many blooms that extend all across the growing season to provide the habitat that's needed, the food source that's needed for native as well as honeybee pollinators. I hope that people recognize that they're not looking at a monoculture of invasive species anymore, that what they're seeing is a diverse and rich restored floodplain habitat with species that are producing edible fruits, nuts, and herbs.
Pennsylvania Infrastructure Investment Authority, PennVest, manages the state revolving fund to finance clean water projects for the communities of the Commonwealth. Historically, PennVest has financed traditional sewer, stormwater, and drinking water projects. As the needs of communities have evolved, PennVest has expanded its financing programs to include non-traditional projects that include non-point source best management practices and projects, green infrastructure projects, acid mine drainage treatment, brownfields redevelopment, unload sewage repair, lateral repairs or first-time hookups, agriculture best management practices, and riparian buffers. Recognizing that there is never enough grant money available to meet demand, PennVest is exploring innovative ways to develop revenue-generating projects that can support a debt service to repay loans. Riparian buffers can be environmental strongholds, but also harvestable and economically productive. PennVest has partnered with Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources to develop a multifunctional revenue-generating riparian buffer program. The idea is to utilize species that generate harvestable commodities like nuts, fruits, flowers, and wood mass as a few examples that can provide a revenue to repay debt service of a loan, as well as potentially create an income or offset revenues that are being generated under current land use activities. Many of the lands that can benefit most from buffers are located within agricultural settings and are currently in production. The program supports the installation of multifunctional buffers to collect information on the cost of installation and estimated return based on the commodities that will be generated. The objective is to collect information to support the case that multifunctional buffers can be revenue generating and further incentivize adoption and implementation of the practice.
Hello, my name is Katherine Zipp, and I'm an assistant professor of environmental and resource economics here at Penn State. I'm going to talk to you about how environmental economists model land use decisions. When farmers make decisions about whether or not to install a riparian buffer, they're choosing between the status quo and the riparian buffer. So they're thinking about the profits they can make currently and the various options they have in the future to change that land use decision. And then when they're deciding whether to put in a buffer, they're thinking about the installation costs, any maintenance costs, including the time required annually to maintain a buffer, long-term restrictions on land use, maybe profits if they're going to harvest their buffer, and they're also thinking about ecosystem benefits. So we are going to look at some of the non-market benefits to buffers as well, thinking about local and regional water quality benefits. Also wildlife habitat, any flood mitigation, and any recreational opportunities that buffers provide. So they're going to choose whichever one of these land uses brings them greater profits. So we really want to think about how do farmers think about these costs of buffers along with some of these benefits. One of the main projects I'm working on now is looking at how does offering farmers flexibility in the design of buffers improve the adoption of these buffers while achieving ecoservice benefits. So for example, we can think about flexible buffer systems that offer a variety of buffer sizes. You can think about anywhere from 10 to 100 feet, recognizing that 35 feet is the current regulation. We could think about different contract lengths. So how long does the buffer have to be installed? So this could go from anywhere from 5 to 20 years. We can think about different payments per acre that could be offered to encourage farmers to adopt buffers and other assistant mechanisms as well. Different vegetation types. Do we want to have trees or grasses or a mixture in these buffers? And also different harvest options of what farmers are allowed to do with their buffers. Are they allowed to do flash grazing or harvest bioenergy crops? So by allowing flexibility in these buffer attributes, we can see how this flexibility leads to farmer adoption of buffers, and then how both of these attributes and the adoption lead to ecosystem services. Right now, we're working on designing a survey to look at how these attributes do influence this adoption, with the end goal of looking at the trade-offs in that some buffer attributes may lead to greater adoption, but may not lead to the ecosystem service benefits that we desire. So we're going to look at how can we design the best attributes to lead to the highest adoption and the highest ecosystem service benefits. Thank you.
Profitable practice for farmers that results in a 98% reduction in cattle activity along streams while adding tree cover. That to me sounds like a practice that could majorly move the needle towards a cleaner, healthier bay.
Now we're good.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ryan Davis. I am the Pennsylvania Forest Program Manager for the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. One of the primary things we do is install riparian forest buffers, and one of the best tools we have to do that is this multifunctional buffer concept. So typically we're working with farmers, and we are based in Lancaster County. We work all over the state, but primarily we're working in Lancaster County where we have the biggest need for more trees and more forests, specifically near our streams. So when you're working on a farm, that income is a huge component of that. Of course, they have a business that they need to run. So they typically are perceiving an income that is being lost when you're excluding that area from being pastured or stopping growing crops there to plant trees. So really you have to replace that income in some way. And the major tools to do that are, first of all, CREP, the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. And then secondarily, a pretty new idea is this multifunctional buffer concept, or I like to call them productive buffers, because pretty much every buffer is forming a lot of functions. And what we have found with these is that it pretty much just opens the conversation a little bit more about how these are useful on the landscape. Because typically the motivators for a farmer are not necessarily just the income there. It's a huge component, but they know that they should get their cows out of the stream. They know that maybe the soybeans don't do too well next to the stream or the corn, so they may as well do something else there. Herd health is a really big motivator, again, keeping the cows out of the mud. But also things like pollinator habitat. These are fantastic ways to put pollinator habitat on the landscape, and a lot of producers intuitively understand that those organisms have been declining lately. Here too, pretty much everywhere, people want habitat for wildlife. In an agricultural context, there's a lot of deer in a lot of places. There's not very many deer here in Lancaster County because we don't have a lot of forest cover. So that's a really big motivator for people here to put in a riparian forest buffer. But then again, that economic motivator is very important. So even if people aren't going to be making a ton of money off of these features, just knowing that you can make money off of them is something that shifts that calculus a little bit towards saying yes to buffers. So specifically, what I like to do, a lot of people are trying new things, trying to push products that'll eventually infiltrate markets. I like to plant things that already have a market now, and are really, really easy to grow. And I try to choose things that are good for a producer not during their busy time of year, because what I found is that it's hard enough to get them to do the maintenance on any buffer during their busy time of year anyway. So if you can have things that are that you're harvesting or whatever, not during the growing season, that's going to be more beneficial to their operation. So we're going to go down in a bit and look at a buffer that's only a year old and starting to look really good. But typically what I'm planting are some things that already have a market again. So things like raspberries. Elderberry is a huge one because it grows very easily, very quickly, and a lot of people already have it in their gardens or whatever, and so they're already making jam out of it. The fact that you can preserve it is huge too. So something like pawpaws are kind of a sexy thing for a lot of people, especially we're recording this in late September, and all social media is full of pawpaw pictures. Everybody's excited about it, but by the time you pick it and get it up to your roadside stand, it's probably going to be all mushy and rotten and no one's going to want to buy it. So something that can be preserved, I like to have incorporated into these instead of things that need to be fresh. So additionally, on that note, that stand at the end of almost every farmer's lane here in Lancaster is something that makes this area, I think, especially fertile, if you will, no pun intended, for this practice, because everyone already has a substrate for selling goods that are produced on their property, rather than taking it to a big feed mill or whatever, or having to start a co-op. Everyone has a little stand at the end of their lane where they sell things that are grown in their garden or on their farm or whatever. So they can already make some elderberry jam or pick raspberries or whatever and just sell them there. They have a little money box if they don't have a kid sitting out there taking money from people, and just whoever drives by and happens to see the stuff while it's out there is going to purchase it. So again, I'm winding much like a stream. Fruit that already has a market are huge, I think. And then the cut stems, I think, are more appealing now than I used to think, because I've really seen a lot of demand for florals. So pussy willow is a really good one, and red stem dogwood, or red osier dogwood, Cornus sericea, I think. And those are harvested in late March, or really throughout the winter you could harvest them for florals. So that's not during the primary season that people are growing things, obviously, but they're really, really easy to grow, and you can sustainably cut those stems year after year after year, as long as you're only taking maybe a quarter or a third of those stems from each shrub. You're going to be able to do that in perpetuity. So you can sell a bundle of pussy willow stems for like $10 or something, maybe more. I've seen them for 10 to 15. And so really you have one shrub that can produce $10 to $15 every single year, and then you plant a couple hundred of those shrubs, then you're making a decent amount of income there that otherwise might not have been great for forage for your cows, might not have been great to try to grow corn in, or sort of poor for hay. And so then the final thing really that I've really started to see traction that I didn't think about is syrup production. A lot of people are really excited about trying to produce syrup in their buffers. So things like sugar maple, that's our kind of, of course it's our primary sugar tree, don't do too well in a wet. Hi, I'm Ryan Davis. I am the Pennsylvania Forest Program Manager for the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. One of the primary things we do is install riparian forest buffers, and one of the best tools we have to do that is this multifunctional buffer concept. So typically we're working with farmers, and we are based in Lancaster County. We work all over the state, but primarily we're working in Lancaster County where we have the biggest need for more trees and more forests, specifically near our streams. So when you're working on a farm, that income is a huge component of that. Of course, they have a business that they need to run. So they typically are perceiving an income that is being lost when you're excluding that area from being pastured or stopping growing crops there to plant trees. So really you have to replace that income in some way. And the major tools to do that are, first of all, CREP, the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. And then secondarily, a pretty new idea is this multifunctional buffer concept, or I like to call them productive buffers, because pretty much every buffer is forming a lot of functions. And what we have found with these is that it pretty much just opens the conversation a little bit more about how these are useful on the landscape. Because typically the motivators for a farmer are not necessarily just the income there. It's a huge component, but they know that they should get their cows out of the stream. They know that maybe the soybeans don't do too well next to the stream or the corn, so they may as well do something else there. Herd health is a really big motivator, again, keeping the cows out of the mud. But also things like pollinator habitat. These are fantastic ways to put pollinator habitat on the landscape, and a lot of producers intuitively understand that those organisms have been declining lately. Here too, pretty much everywhere, people want habitat for wildlife. In an agricultural context, there's a lot of deer in a lot of places. There's not very many deer here in Lancaster County because we don't have a lot of forest cover. So that's a really big motivator for people here to put in a riparian forest buffer. But then again, that economic motivator is very important. So even if people aren't going to be making a ton of money off of these features, just knowing that you can make money off of them is something that shifts that calculus a little bit towards saying yes to buffers. So specifically, what I like to do, a lot of people are trying new things, trying to push products that'll eventually infiltrate markets. I like to plant things that already have a market now, and are really easy to grow. And I try to choose things that are good for a producer not during their busy time of year, because what I found is that it's hard enough to get them to do the maintenance on any buffer during their busy time of year anyway. So if you can have things that are that you're harvesting or whatever, not during the growing season, that's going to be more beneficial to their operation. So we're going to go down in a bit and look at a buffer that's only a year old and starting to look really good. But typically what I'm planting are some things that already have a market again. So things like raspberries. Elderberry is a huge one because it grows very easily, very quickly, and a lot of people already have it in their gardens or whatever, and so they're already making jam out of it. The fact that you can preserve it is huge too. So something like pawpaws are kind of a sexy thing for a lot of people, especially we're recording this in late September, and all social media is full of pawpaw pictures. Everybody's excited about it, but by the time you pick it and get it up to your roadside stand, it's probably going to be all mushy and rotten, and no one's going to want to buy it. So something that can be preserved, I like to have incorporated into these instead of things that need to be fresh. So additionally, on that note, that stand at the end of almost every farmer's lane here in Lancaster is something that makes this area, I think, especially fertile, if you will, no pun intended, for this practice, because everyone already has a substrate for selling goods that are produced on their property, rather than taking it to a big feed mill or whatever or having to start a co-op, everyone has a little stand at the end of their lane where they sell things that are grown in their garden or on their farm or whatever. So they can already make some elderberry jam or pick raspberries or whatever and just sell them there. They have a little money box if they don't have a kid sitting out there taking money from people, and just whoever drives by and happens to see the stuff while it's out there is going to purchase it. So again, I'm winding much like a stream. Fruit that already has a market are huge, I think, and then the cut stems, I think, are more appealing now than I used to think, because I've really seen a lot of demand for florals. So pussy willow is a really good one, and red stem dogwood, or red osier dogwood, Cornus sericea, I think. And those are harvested in late March, really throughout the winter you could harvest them for florals. So that's not during the primary season that people are growing things, obviously. But they're really, really easy to grow, and you can sustainably cut those stems year after year after year, as long as you're only taking maybe a quarter or a third of those stems from each shrub. You're going to be able to do that in perpetuity. So you can sell a bundle of pussy willow stems for like $10 or something, maybe more. I've seen them for 10 to 15. And so really you have one shrub that can produce $10 to $15 every single year, and then you plant a couple hundred of those shrubs, and you're making a decent amount of income there that otherwise might not have been great for forage for your cows, might not have been great to try to grow corn in, or sort of poor for hay. And so then the final thing really that I've really started to see traction that I didn't think about is syrup production. A lot of people are really, really excited about trying to produce syrup in their buffers. So things like sugar maple, that's our kind of, of course it's our primary sugar tree, don't do too well in a wet area. If there's a dry area, we can plant them, a little bit further away from the stream. But really, silver maple grows very quickly, and red maple grows very well in these areas too. And those produce sap as well. That can be tapped. You just have to boil a lot more, sometimes twice as much, to get syrup out of it. But again, there's already a market for that. People want to buy syrup produced from a local farmer. And so it's just a really easy way to gain that income. They do have to wait an extended period to do that. So oftentimes what I do is I'll plant a little bit more advanced stock of those syrup producing trees. But that's another thing that's just there, ready for the taking. We don't have to do any extra work. We don't have to maintain them in any different way. There's no pesticide use involved with that. It's just a really easy way to get some money out of these buffers. Here is our elderberry, one of our really good species that I like to plant. Does really, really well. You can actually see this one. This was planted as a bare root seedling, and again, I typically, if it's going to be producing fruit, I like to plant a little bit more advanced stock, but I used a bare root seedling with this, so it came about this tall and with no soil on it, just in a cardboard box, and this is how much it grew in the first year. We planted this in early April. So there's a stem that's coming out from the root. A lot of these are multi-stemmed species, elderberry in particular. So we're using a shorter shelter, which if you have even moderate deer pressure, that's probably not a good idea. But since we don't here, and these multi-stemmed things don't do too well unless you are using a pretty short shelter. But a lot of the things can handle heavy browse. So elderberry, if it was nipped off, it would sprout pretty readily, likely. You don't want it to impact your fruit production too much, but you have to use those shorter shelters. And so you can see here, what we do is an average minimum width of 35 feet. The row next to the stream is typically canopy species that are going to put shade on that stream and provide a lot of the other functions of a forest that we want. And then the outside row of that 35 feet is our shrub. So here we have American plum, elderberry, serviceberry. Some red buds are within for floral production, because those produce that purple flower early in March-ish, when not much else is going on that potentially people could sell stems of. And it's just a great species to have around for pollinators and all sorts of other things. But so this is one of our buffers, and it's only a year old, and it's getting pretty close to starting to be able to actually produce things that can be sold.
Okay, Roger Rohrer. It's October 10th. We're doing a 2-minute video for the multi-purpose buffer webinar, or something to that effect. Anyway, I am 4th generation. My 2 sons are 5th generation. We have 2 farms, 210 acres we own. Their 2 farms are about a mile apart. We have 32 total acres in buffers, and 19 of them are in warm season grass, and 13 of them are in reforestation, tree reforestation. I want to sustainability is a big thing for our operation: economic, environmental, and cultural. Cultural sustainability is probably a term you don't hear a lot, but we look at that as being a good neighbor in a neighborhood. I chose this spot for the 2-minute video. I wanted to show a 2-acre reforestation buffer. We're 180 feet from a stream. I wanted to show a 3-year-old switchgrass buffer, which is a warm season grass. And I wanted to show our good crop ground over the top. Our main enterprise is 6 broiler houses that are on contract, and we also grow row crops and have a retail mulch business. The switchgrass buffer provides for the future. Wildlife habitat, holds the soil, builds organic matter, and when the contract's up, we may farm it. We may continue to keep switchgrass in it. The reforestation buffer provides for, based on Stroud research, a real healthy stream bugs to help the stream keep it clean, and it also filters water that runs off from the farmland. I'm going to take you around here and show you our 7-year-old buffer, which is right beside this 2-year-old buffer. We use a lot of BMPs to build organic matter in our crop ground, no-till, covered crops. This is a double crop bean field. It was wheat, a very productive field. This 2-year-old buffer, reforestation buffer, was an extension of a 5-acre, 7-year-old buffer. Our biggest problem here is a weak spot, and that is caused by whitetail damage from trees. We find lots of sheds. One of the big deals that we see as a benefit from a cultural standpoint is our neighborhood. Dan Lapp Jr., a neighbor of ours, has just called us last week, said he shot a real nice 8-point buck. He wanted us to know about it, and Mark, my boys, have trail camera pictures out, and it lived on this farm right here, probably for 2 years, and our neighbor shot it, which is fine. That just goes with the game. We like to harvest whitetails also, and it's our main entertainment as a family. So multi-purpose, clean water, filtering water coming off the farmland, cultural benefits from the neighbors loving to see the wild turkeys and the deer that they didn't used to see, and you know, that's pretty much it. That's all I can say in 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Mike Hile. I'm with Penn State University in the Department of Agriculture and Biological Engineering. Standing here at the Pennsylvania State Game Lands. Just ran into some folks, and there's a big push to plant perennial grasses in field sites in Pennsylvania. They provide a great habitat for ringneck pheasants, which we just released a few a couple minutes ago. They do control burns and spraying to control invasives. And I'm standing right down site of our Rockview site, where Steph Herbstritt's doing some research on water quality and warm season perennial grasses.
Hello, my name is Will Brandau, and I'm a farmer in Luzerne County. I've been growing warm season grass for over 10 years. I got involved because of a biologist that I met at an energy fair. My plan was to grow warm season grass to make fuel pellets. I was hoping to go in competition with big oil. I have a pellet mill. In fact, I have 3 pellet mills that I play with. I've taught people how to make pellets themselves. My basic problem is that warm season grass, switchgrass, does not pelletize well. It does not densify well. I was part of the Benton School project, and we had a furnace at Benton School as part of the Fuel for Schools project, and the idea was that the farmers were going to grow warm season grass, and the school was going to heat the school facility with that grass after it was densified. We had between 500 and 600 acres in the ground here between Columbia and Luzerne County. We failed miserably. In 6 months, we were able to densify about 12 ton of material. They needed 20 ton a week to heat the school. They ended up using industrial wood pellets. The idea of using warm season grass for fuel didn't work for us. I gave pellets away to people to try out. Nobody ever came back to get any more. They took the samples and left. Warm season grass as a fuel produces a lot of ash, and you have to empty that ash 4 times as many times as you would with a wood stove burning wood. So fuel pellets, fuel briquettes didn't work for us. About 3 years ago, at the urging of the Penn State Extension, a group got together in State College and formed an organization called the Association of Warm Season Grass Producers. I wasn't at the meeting, and I got elected chairman. I guess I need to attend meetings more, but we've been active now for about 3 years. Initially, the focus of the group was fuel, and that's where we were concentrating, and it continued not to work well for us. When we changed our focus, things opened up. It was discovered that warm season grass makes fantastic bedding or fantastic filler for silt socks. Now, silt socks are those long snake-like things that you see along construction sites. Whenever they break ground, they have to put silt socks around to prevent erosion. And normally they use bark, but silt socks filled with switchgrass are a lot lighter. They work just as well. They don't pollute. And what's happened is that companies are starting to realize that instead of putting bark in them, putting switchgrass in them works so much better. So what's happened is the market has boomed all of a sudden. 4 years ago, I sold my crop to a guy in New Jersey for fuel for his greenhouse. He paid me $80 a ton at the gate. Companies are now paying $150 or more for a ton of switchgrass. And so we're selling to these companies. I sold everything that I have on the farm this year. Everybody else that I know did the same thing. I'm looking forward to next year, anticipating that the market is going to be there. In addition, poultry bedding, switchgrass, warm season grass as poultry bedding is fantastic. We were in 5 county fairs with our switchgrass in the poultry buildings, and the people loved it. Instead of using wood chips, they used our switchgrass, and it worked very well for them. We were at the Bloomsburg Fair. We had switchgrass in 900 bird cages, and they've already said that they want us back again next year. In addition, we're going to be in the Harrisburg Farm Show in January, and they have close to 1,000 cages that we'll be putting switchgrass into. They've dropped their wood chips, and they're going to move to grass. I'm standing in a field of it right now. It's a fantastic crop. It keeps coming back year after year. I'm in a 10-acre plot, and I anticipate this is going to produce somewhere in the neighborhood of about 4 ton an acre. The future for switchgrass, warm season grasses, I feel is going to be really, really bright in the future, and I'm psyched. I can't wait. Hey, thanks very much for asking me to talk. Wish I could be there.
Well, hello everybody. My name is Dan Arnett. I'm the Biomass Coordinator at Ernst Seeds and the manager of Ernst Biomass in Meadville, Pennsylvania. We've been asked to do a little bit of a piece about some information on switchgrass and the potential markets we see. So I figured here I'd give you just a view of one of our production fields that's been harvested. Both the seed and the biomass has been removed from it. We've been working with processing and trying to develop markets for this native warm season grass biomass for about the last 10 years or so. The environmental benefits of these plants, combined with their ability to thrive on truly marginal land, have made them the focus of potential feedstock discussions for a number of different models and concepts over the years. Originally in the 1920s, the USDA ARS first started studying them as a way to smooth out the grazing or the dip in production for ranchers in between their cool season grasses that would stop producing a whole lot during the summer. So that was the original way back when idea when people started looking at these grasses. Now in recent years, in the past couple decades, we've seen increased interest for the sustainable biomass produced by these. And I don't mean to repeat anybody or steal anybody's thunder, but looking through the list, this program's full of varied authorities on native warm season grasses. So I apologize if I'm repeating myself or other presenters, but right now we're currently aware of development work with markets that have to do with cow and horse bedding, what I would call small and backyard poultry bedding. And then the opposite end of that spectrum is the large scale poultry bedding. Then you have some industrial absorbency applications, some kitty litter, erosion prevention products, and then thermal conversion, of course. These markets are all variable in their maturity and how big of markets they are, what their scope is. And they're also variable in the amount of processing or value added that they require for the producers to put into the fiber. The challenge in this day and age isn't the production necessarily of the fiber, but finding an efficient amount of processing that is also economical to get it to a point where it's worthwhile for the producer and also worthwhile for the consumer and acceptable for the consumer. Now these fields here, you'll see I'm just driving along the road, so there's some varied species in the ditches, but here's another production field. You can see again it's been harvested. When I talk about marginal ground, you can kind of see the ruts out through there. You can also see the swale out in the middle of the field that was left stand. Just demonstrating how these grasses do well on a varied amount of different soils. So in a nutshell, yeah, there's still a lot of folks working towards it. There are some pretty interesting developments going on. There's some big markets and some little markets, and it'll be very interesting to see what the next couple of years holds for these grasses. As we wind up here, you'll see where we've gathered our bales for our staging area to go ahead and load out. Most of our production is done in large round bales, even though large square bales are the most efficient way in this part of the world. We find this works for us. Thank you again. This is Dan from Ernst Seeds. If you have any questions or comments, please don't be afraid to reach out and get a hold of me. Thanks.
As we saw in this webinar, there are a number of benefits farmers and others can receive from planting multifunctional buffers, and a number of pathways to getting buffers on the ground, including government subsidies, private funding, and demonstrated markets for buffer crops. But barriers exist to growing a regional bioeconomy that can support buffer plantings, including farmer preferences for traditional cropping systems, lack of strong links between science, farming, industry, government, and environmental groups, and the infancy of regional biomass markets. How we best accelerate the path to 95,000 acres with the greatest economic, social, and environmental impact is still up for debate and something we need to discuss. And how we do so in a way that doesn't create unintended consequences for future generations, like ensuring our buffers don't become oversaturated with phosphorus or cause flooding downstream, is something we need to discuss. Together we can create a roadmap forward, and we're looking forward to starting that with you all in November at our workshop. Thank you for your time, and now we'll open it up for a Q&A session.
Hi, so I was just thinking about the question, are we talking specifically multi-use buffers or kind of any buffer available?
I would say any buffer available.
Okay, I think a lot of the reserve that farmers who I've worked with have had mostly deals with the maintenance long term and where that funding is coming from and how much support they're going to get to make sure that it succeeds. A lot of them are really busy as it is, and so, you know, this thing is kind of the lower priority for most of them. And you know, if it doesn't get done in the day that they need it to get done, then it won't happen at all. And so they kind of have a struggle to deal with the maintenance aspects of things. So, and I know, you know, if they're using something like CREP, they get a decent amount of support. And depending on what county they're in, you know, they're probably getting, I mean, in Lancaster anyway, that's where I do most of my work, they get pretty good rates. And so they have enough money kind of to pay a contractor to do it if they would need. And they're getting good rental rates and that sort of thing. But other counties, maybe not so much. And then you kind of come to the conclusion that, well, some of these buffers are not being put in through CREP. They're being put in through temporary grants, you know, whether that's NIFWIF or Growing Greener or, you know, Stroud dollars or whatever. And those grants don't often, let's say they don't fund that maintenance for the duration that it needs to be funded. So if the grant period is only 3 years and you don't actually get that buffer in the ground until the third year of that grant, then really you only have a year of maintenance dollars, which is just not enough to make that buffer succeed. So I think the maintenance funding and support is probably one of the largest drawbacks for my landowners.
Thank you for those responses. We also received several questions through the group chat. So the first one was from Ann English, and it's how many people that sign up for buffers are resident farmers versus landowners that contract out their farming?
That's a good question. Yeah, when you're working with farmers who, or you know, you're working with landowners who have tenant farmers, you really have to negotiate, you know, two groups there, you know, and it becomes even trickier if there's family involved because, you know, if grandpa doesn't want, or, you know, if somebody doesn't want the buffer on the property, then you have to negotiate the family relations as well. So, I mean, that's a pretty good question. You know, how many people are dealing with, you know, the tenant farmer situation? So I know I've run into it a few times. Mm-hmm.
So we have another question from Mike about, would multifunctional buffers be less maintenance, or would the maintenance be different than something farmers are more used to? I think that also goes to any farmer that is also on the call. If you would like to share your experiences, you're most welcome to. So possibly, I can see that Ann English is still on the call. What has been your experience with the buffers that you have established? Are they high maintenance? Do you have to spend a lot of time on them?
We have a response from Ann English. She says, our biggest challenge is honoring the timing of maintenance with the program rules and having the best timing for invasives, minimum chemicals.
David Wise. Going back to the maintenance question, I think it would really depend on what type of production system you're thinking about. For many of the more conventional approaches for example, elderberries or some of the woody florals, it wouldn't seem to me that there would be critical reasons how that would depart from some of the maintenance we've learned to do on you know, conventional, not-for-profit buffers. I think a lot of the insights can apply very directly. For something like harvesting woody biomass, that's a completely different reality that I think you can be faced with some challenges when you're trying to do broad-based planting, how you do weed control and manage for some of the other issues with the set planting attempt like moles. But it would seem like some of the more fruit and nut production ideas could move forward using some of the existing technologies we've demonstrated for the last dozen years or so now.
I'm not sure about this, but I know in some cases for like the CREF program and some of the other programs that there are specific restrictions around seasonality for doing certain activities in order to protect certain wildlife and species, et cetera. And that may come into conflict with management requirements for certain of the multifunctional.
And just a reminder on CREP, there's some pretty significant barriers to any for-profit harvesting out of buffers that CREP would have paid to install. That would be a different reality once the contract is ended. I'm aware there are some enterprising individuals who've planted stock on the shortest contract basis available and then use that in other ways for profit after the contract is ended. So CREP could be a means of establishing things that once the contract is over is free and clear of any prohibitions on when maintenance is done or when harvesting is done or the sale and use of harvested items. But just CREP has a lot of its own limitations and regulations.
Hello, this is Paul Patterson at Penn State. I just had another comment regarding establishment, and at least our experience within our CS, irrigation is not one of the challenges to recover the cost of establishing irrigation. When you establish plants, that's a real cost and not well covered. The other challenge with some of the programs is they tend to be kind of a monoculture concept. You're either building a windbreak or a riparian buffer, but there's the landscaping screening, the biomass, the energy conservation. There's so many components that it's difficult to blend these functional properties of buffers and get the full benefit realized from these programs. Just a thought.
Well, Mike had asked a question about markets and profitability and the future markets and profitability. And we heard a really great discussion from Will Brandau about how that had sort of changed for him over the last few years. And I think with that silk stock market, we don't know what the capacity of that is. That would be worth finding out, but that's a very lucrative market for right now. And because it's a better product than the alternatives, it wouldn't surprise me if the perennial grasses took over that entire sector. There are some other things that we're working on at Penn State. We're not quite ready for commercialization, but the pellet option that Will said was such a problem for him in the past is definitely a challenge. And Dan Arnett and Ernst have had some experience with working out strategies that do work for that, but it's not easy, especially at a smaller scale. But we are looking at other energy options, including fermentation and anaerobic digestion in partnership with livestock farms. And that looks like another future market that might expand. And then the bedding market, I think, is also a really exciting one. And there's certainly work to be done, but the initial experiences in some of the livestock sectors have been really positive. I don't know, Paul, if you're still on the line, Paul Patterson, I know you've got some experience with that as well.
Yeah, we use switchgrass, miscanthus, poplar shavings, and chopped willow as bedding for poultry. They're all very desirable. The other benefit is their potential fuel source for heating and brooding baby birds and/or heating poultry houses. The other plus is that's a way of pulling phosphate that would normally be applied to the land off the land and condensing it into a form that you can export from the watershed. I'll just go on and say that we think in terms of riparian buffers, but they're also windbreaks, and they're also shade banks, and they're also landscaping and screening around farms. And if you put even riparian type species up close to fans to trap and treat water and runoff of impervious surfaces such as roads and roofs around livestock facilities, you're also trapping and treating air emissions. And these plants can scrub dust, odor, ammonia, and other things. So I just think there's a host of other things that in addition to riparian functions that they can serve. And the last one is, as one of our speakers mentioned in the video, is the silviculture opportunity. As birds are moving outside for organic and outdoor access, birds need cover, and biomass willow and other plant materials adjacent, again, to barns and impervious surfaces provide cover for birds. And this prevents erosion and serves a multiple function, protecting birds from aerial predators and ground predators and other things, and providing a food stock. And just like the fruits, nuts, and berries that you might grow next to a stream for production and sale, foraging animals can take advantage of those and provide a niche market product. We worked with Tracey Coulter and grew kind of a heritage breed turkey fed on mushrooms, grasses, herbs, nuts, berries, all kinds of things that you might be able to grow in those settings.
Thank you, everyone.